This is going to be a joint presentation between Sayan Chaudhuri and Monishita Pande. A quick introduction to both the presenters. Sayan Chaudhuri teaches at the Critical Writing Program at Young India Fellowship in Ashoka University, and he teaches a course which is titled Education, Literacy and Justice. His larger interest is in developing a critical literacy and public pedagogy resources for students, educators, and activists. His co-presenter, Monishita Pande, is the Assistant Director of the Critical Writing Program of Young India Fellowship at Ashoka University. And she teaches courses in critical writing. Her expertise is in language education, and other research interests include classroom discourse, cross-linguistic transfer of skills, learner autonomy, and multilingualism. So I thank both Sayan Chaudhuri and Monishita Pande and invite them to do their presentation, which is titled Playful Pedagogy, the Possibilities of Role-Playing and Co-Teaching. And I'm guessing both of you are actually going to do a role play for us.
Yeah,
okay, great. So I will keep time, and again, I will sort of interrupt you maybe when you have about 2 to 3 minutes left.
sure.
Okay, over to you.
Thank you so much, Madhura. So a very good evening to all of you. And so I'll first, so the way Sayan and I want to present is we'll first talk about the motivations for trying out co-teaching in the online mode. Why did we try to do it? Did it, I mean, what were the motivations? Then we are going to actually enact the role play, which we did in the class. Out of the 3 role plays that we did, we'll just show you one, and we would love to collect some of your reactions. And then we will end it with some of the insights and learnings that we gathered from this experiment. So I joined the Young India Fellowship in July 2020, in the middle of the pandemic. And I was not only expected to teach writing and reading, but also to lead the program and a group of 7 writing instructors at Ashoka. For me, it was an insurmountable task because I hadn't met my team, and I was not only expected to create new material curriculum for the online mode, but also to provide faculty development opportunities for my team, understand their challenges and help them make the switch from online and from offline to online. So I had to really find a sense of community for myself, even to create that for my students. And I also wanted to locate myself, my own pedagogical and philosophical understanding of reading and writing within the team. So I felt the first and the most important step to get connected with the team of instructors was to explore the idea of co-teaching. And because it was online, we tried to leverage that medium because it becomes much easier, right, logistically, to use the online medium for the same. And that's when I approached Sayan, because both of us share similar themes. There are lots of overlaps in our themes. We both discuss language in higher education, literacy questions, topics from linguistics. So I felt we have some common themes through which we are working. So that's a good starting point. So it all started with creating a sense of belonging for myself and the team, also to create a sense of community for my students, because I am a Vygotskian and I strongly believe that it's so important to allow peer learning, and I was very, very nervous about that in the online medium. So how can my students also connect with the larger YIF ecosystem? So Sayan, would you like to talk about your motivations?
Yeah, thanks, Monishita. And I resonate with some of what Monishita said, especially when it comes to creating a community among students. For me, however, the primary motivation was just to collaborate. And I have co-taught a few times before, and I was just looking for an opportunity. I find co-teaching to be inherently playful. I think it requires a creative alignment of different, even contrasting temperaments, and produces pedagogic possibilities one would not discover on their own. Monishita and my course had thematic overlaps, as she said, but at the same time, I did not really know her or how she really taught, and it was my opportunity to find out. Now, since we were co-teaching, I wanted to explore an issue that spoke to the everyday institutional life of both teachers and students. An issue that everyone is perhaps talking about, but not necessarily analyzing. So in the sessions that we co-taught, the issues we took up included the politics of evaluation, the institutional construction of writing programs, and the performance of critical thinking and reflection in the classroom. So these were issues that spoke to both structural and practical concerns. To reflect on them would involve inquiring into the conditions of university and society, but also require a very concrete reflection on the everyday classroom practices. Now, the concept of a role play provided a useful technique to address both these concerns. A role play, while rooted in a particular event or situation, is also imagined within a social institutional context. And we wanted students to tease out how that particular event is linked to wider contexts. Our role play is also playful, it is relatable, improvisational, and of course, a whole lot of fun. Now, to make things more playful right now, we are going to demonstrate the first role play that we did. Now, just to give some context before we start, this session happened roughly around the time we were going to provide feedback for the first main assignment in the semester. And so the session was broadly on how we understand evaluation and feedback, what are the cultures, practices, and value systems of evaluation. Also, peer feedback and peer learning are terms that are emphasized in the critical writing program, but also in the Young India Fellowship generally, right? And everyone's talking about it perhaps a bit loosely sometimes. And we wanted to actually encourage a deeper reflection of that. And we particularly wanted to introduce a vocabulary through which students could help to begin to think more carefully about the murky world of evaluation. Now, I'll share my screen, and in the role play, we enact a peer feedback situation. So Monishita and I are peers who have both responded to the prompt, what is peer evaluation? And we are going to place slightly contrasting personalities and exaggeratedly play out our differences. And what happened in the class is after we did the role play, so students sort of responded to what they observed. And through that, we built a discussion on the various dimensions of peer feedback and evaluation. So take a few seconds to read the two extracts while we get into character.
Okay, so let's begin. Hi, Sayan.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine. I was really looking forward to this peer feedback session, and I saw your response to the question that was given to us in class, what is peer evaluation? And when I was going through your writing, I was so intrigued by the way you string sentences together, and you're so well read. Even in class, the way you respond to the instructor's questions, I mean, you bring in theorists, and how do you do it?
You just need to read, Monishita. I mean, that's how you do it. I mean, I just read a lot, and I particularly try to read a lot of critical theory. And as you see here, I've included a lot of Foucault. I mean, I've sort of broadly referred to the Foucauldian tradition from within which I'm taking some ideas. So that's a simple response. You need to read.
No, I mean, for example, I am not an avid reader. I'm more into popular culture, visual media. I just can't read very theoretical text. So, I mean, how
No,
do you think I
not
can?
an option. That's not an option, right? I mean, you can of course consume popular culture, but you have to read. I mean, we are working in a course where you are not supposed to just consume popular culture, but you're supposed to come up with rigorous conceptions and theoretical conceptions of what you mean. So you have to read. Anyway, do you have anything concrete to say about my?
No, I was wondering, how did you place your writing within the larger North American Cosmopolitan Studies.
North American Composition Studies, Monishita, Composition Studies.
Okay, sorry.
Discourse
Yeah, I meant composition. Yeah, so I mean, how did you choose that term? I mean, what made you bring it into your writing? I mean, I didn't think about it, for instance.
When I was reading the scholarship, when I was trying to research for the project, I mean, I realized that this is a discursive field that is pretty dominant and hegemonic in shaping, attitudes towards peer feedback right now. So I thought, let me just go through it. But yeah, anything else that you have to mention about this?
Yeah, I mean, just the last thing that I wanted to point out, what really stood out for me was the reference to the Foucauldian tradition and the use of these terms like socio-material codifications. I mean, I was just blown off, when I read it, such complex language, and I had to read it like multiple times to understand what you're trying to say. And I was like awed, because I don't think my writing is anywhere close to this. So,
Yeah, Monishita, of course, I put in a lot of effort into this, and the labor of thinking, right, has to go into actually being able to come up with these rigorous theoretical understandings. In any case, I don't think you have anything concrete to say. So can we move on to your piece?
Yeah, please. I mean, I would love to hear what you have to say about my writing.
Monishita, firstly, I want to say that why do you make grammatical mistakes? In the first sentence itself, I see that, I don't know if this is a grammatical mistake that you're consciously making or this is a typo, but you're saying peer evaluation allows us to learn in collaborative manner. It's in a collaborative manner, right? And even later in the next sentence.
But then, these definite articles, I just don't I can't wrap my head around them. Sometimes
you have to understand
I
that,
overuse them.
But Monishita, you have to understand that we are working at a level where these problems need to be fixed at the outset, right? I mean, these are lower order problems, Monishita, right? And here we are here to apply our higher order thinking skills, and we need to sort of, theorize, analyze, and so on and so forth. So firstly, fix these problems. That's one. Two, you are writing in a very sort of emotive register, right? You're saying something like, while getting feedback from a teacher is comforting, but who cares whether it's comforting or not, right? It doesn't matter if it's comforting to you. We want to understand, right, that is it an opinion that is shared collectively? Has this been researched? What is the evidence to prove such a claim, right? And third, Monishita, you seem to sort of write in more of a personal register. So you announce that I personally believe that peer evaluation can be useful only. But Monishita, your personal beliefs don't matter here, right?
But then, Shan, I want to say something.
Let me finish. This is an academic paper, right? And an academic passage, you have to validate what you're saying, right? So your
But sorry to interrupt. I need to just share one thing. I agree that I need to work on my language. I mean, that is definitely something that I need to work on, which I'm aware of. However, if you look at some of the ideas there, I do see some resonance or similarities with what you have said. For instance, look at the word dynamic. I have also used it. Dynamic framework. You are talking about dynamic exchange of ideas. We are both talking about questioning institutional culture, and power relations. They are similar. It's just that you have used a more theoretical frame, and I'm using more experience-based personal thing, which I need to work on. That's what you're trying to say, right?
Monishita, I mean, just because we're using the same word doesn't mean we're saying the same thing, right? My language is at the level of abstraction. Your language is at the level of personal experience. There's a difference, right? And I don't think we're saying the same thing, even though we're using same words. Remember, each word is used contextually. So do pay attention to the use of words. And Monishita, I have to go now. There are other projects that I also have to.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'll get back. I mean, I'll come back to you for more inputs, Thank you, Shan.
Okay, so hate me now. Now,
so you can stop screen share, Shan.
Okay, so can we now get maybe at least a couple of responses, like quick responses on.
We want to kill you.
Yeah, I'm getting my hockey stick.
Well, that was clearly
you did the Amrish Puri of feedback. Yeah, Sayan, thank you for taking up that terrible role, which is making people get their hockey sticks. No, but the thing is, how average is that? How just about normal is that? And how
just about celebrated is that. I think that's the point they wanted to make, and I'm so glad they took their time to do this and demonstrate it. We know it, but to see it like this was fantastic.
Thank you, Ananya. So just moving forward, now we come to the, of course, please do share your reactions, responses in the chat box and also in the Q&A. We would love to engage more with what you think about this technique. But now we would like to go into the last bit of our presentation where we want to wrap it up with our insights and learnings. What did this process mean for us as instructors? So one thing that we definitely did was to question the power relations, both explicit and implicit. And we through role play, which had that performative angle, it really made it easy for us to do it and bring out some of these subtle equations that play out even within the Young India Fellows, because we have a very diverse class. Thankfully, diversity not as an overrated term, but a real palpable sense of heterogeneity in the class. So this really helped us to question power relation at both team level, like how we both collaborated, and also within our groups. The second thing was, personally, I felt after these co-teaching and role plays that we did, my students connected with me at a different level. They saw a different version of me. That was very useful for me in the online mode. Also, we were able to create a common meta language to talk about these critical constructs and concepts that we consciously engage in during the semester. Also, the cross-curricular dialogues made it very useful for the students to understand that they're part of a larger group of people, because in the online mode, they were constantly stressing about the fact that they're feeling alienated. So here they were able to be in a class of 50. Otherwise, our classes are much smaller, right? So that was another important takeaway from the whole experience. Now, just to wrap up this portion, I want to share a very concrete learning that I had during the process when I was planning these sessions with Sayan. So we did another role play on critical thinking and critical reflection as a spectrum. And because I come from a language education background, I was heavily drawing from existing models and theories, which are kind of standardized to some extent in my field to look at critical reflection as a concept. And Sayan had his own disciplinary vantage points. From a critical literacy perspective, he was able to help me to problematize those widely accepted frameworks. For me, that was a deep moment of learning. And it allowed me to question my own assumptions and beliefs about my pedagogical choices. And it's an ongoing process, but that for me was the most important takeaway, where I was able to put my ideas as a teacher to critical examination and have a honest conversation with a peer, not just within the team but also my students who became part of that questioning that I was doing. Sayan, would you like to wrap it up with your insights?
Yeah, so first, with regard to the role play, I mean, it opened up quite a complex conversation. And we had a discussion with regard to the feedback role play. We had a discussion on the attitudinal, tonal, behavioral, linguistic, and sociocultural aspects of feedback. That we are not merely responding to words on a page, but also conveying value systems, negotiating power dynamics, and participating in particular literacy practices. And as Monishita said, we were opening ourselves up for critique and in fact, providing the tools to students to dismantle us, right? To question us, probe us, and transform us. More generally, the role play allowed us to play out a relatable situation. This is something we reproduced in the other role plays too, through which social anxieties could be discussed in a more honest manner. It also helped us explore contrasts between opposing ideas, not necessarily to validate one over the other. In this case, clearly, I mean, one self-caricature was far stronger, but in other role plays, there was an equality too. But to show how educational experience is frequently a contestation between different perspectives. And in terms of, student responses, it was also a very moving experience, because after this class, a few students reached out to share how this was an empowering experience for them. Most students have been at the receiving end of punishing and opaque evaluative systems, which have either generated low self-esteem or negative forms of self-labeling, or a certain cynical mentality where you just learn to hack the system insincerely. And this session was an opportunity to have an honest conversation about how evaluation culture can be empowering, and how the responsibility to do that is on all of us, right? At the end of the session, we asked students to identify one aspect that they consider to be essential for peer feedback, and they put it down on a Google form. And overwhelmingly, like more than 90%, the responses were about the importance of empathizing, active listening, using precise and constructive language, recognizing power dynamics, and cultivating a sensitivity towards the other. And finally, to come back to the metaphor of play, it was a great bonding and learning experience. And I was, in fact, partially sort of caricaturing my own Savarna man conditioning to be abstract. And I think, like, through Monishita, I think Monishita's articulation was far more connected to experience, and it touched me. It sort of was subtly changing me as the class was going on. Also, in terms of sort of small techniques, I mean, at some point in the class when we were collecting student discussions, Monishita was sort of jotting them down in the Zoom chat. And I thought, oh, why hadn't this occurred to me? This is a great way of acknowledging the student responses and also summarizing. So in terms of both emotional as well as more sort of practical learnings, there were quite a few. And of course, I learned a lot from Monishita's perspectives. And by the end of the session, I knew that I had changed a little through Monishita, through her students, and of course, my students. So that's our presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sayan and Monishita. And again, as yesterday Aditi also had said, this is the time when we all applause for all the three presenters, except that we won't be able to hear it. But thank you, all three of you. This was a great, I mean, I'm just so glad that Ananya, you called me to chair this session and I got to hear all of this. This was really, really, really wonderful in terms of the three different aspects that all your presentations bring out. And I mean, when I first read all your abstracts of your presentations, one thing that struck me, and I think after having heard your presentations also, I think one thing that strikes me is also the role of collaboration in the teaching of writing specifically, but also in pedagogically, you know, in pedagogy as a larger picture, right? Because in writing, we do place a lot of premium on collaboration, whether it is between instructors, but also between instructors and the students, right? And that fundamental challenging of the instructor-led kind of pedagogy. And I think that all three of you in your various, you know, the transactions of your teaching practices have kind of brought out what that, you know, the possibilities of that collaboration. Whether Sandeep, when you actually sort of opened up the course and had 5 instructors teach the course instead of 1, or for Pritha, you know, the PPT ceasing to become like this whole prescriptive document, but something that's worked upon, and students' responses also get incorporated in that, where they get to own it. Or then again here in Sayan and Monishita, your the role play, where I mean students actually get to inhabit right, that space. So these are really varying ways in which the whole, I think the value of collaboration is seeping into the classroom, is seeping into the practice of pedagogy. So I think that really for me is one very big thing that comes through all the 3 presentations. But one thing that I quickly want to also say, because since this panel is titled as, you know, making offline strategies work online, and what happens when what happens when we go from offline to online teaching. I mean, there's been so much that has been said about that, but one important thing that I think we all need to really pay attention to is that when we go from offline to online, there is a huge, the loss of space of the institution. And I think that that's really, really important, that when students attend classes in a university, there is the physical material and the social space of the institution, right? The university, the classrooms, the teachers in person, their friends, and all those dynamics. And when that moves online, the entire institution disappears and all it gets telescoped into this one computer or phone screen with no sense of building friends connection, right? I mean, this is something that we all know. I'm merely repeating it, but I think that all the three presentations need to be framed within this larger sort of what happens when we go online and the loss of that institutional space, right? Material or social space, right? And I think that all three of you address that aspect, advertently or inadvertently, but you do end up addressing that. And that again, for me, was very, very important. I think that's important for all of us to think through when we think of the transition between offline to online. So that's that's the broader thing that I want to sort of highlight here. But and we'll soon now throw it open to questions. There already are some. I quickly want to make use of the privilege of being the chair and have one question for each one of you. The first, my question to Sandeep would be, Sandeep, if you could elaborate a little bit upon the online transaction of these, what was the specificities of that online transaction? And also, if we could get you to reflect upon, why do you think your students chose those questions that they did? Right, the majority of them chose to work with their language, their relationship with their mother tongue, and the other was, what if feminists ruled the world, right? And did that have to do with the way this course was transacted? If you could think through that for us. Pritha, again, thank you. I am an advocate of PPT, so I'm like, yes, somebody is there to who is saying good things about the PPT. What I want, I think what's really important is that the visuality of the PPT, and I don't think we end up in the whole, maligning of PPT, we don't end up really looking at the potential of what that visuality brings, especially to a writing classroom, especially when we are teaching students texts. And when texts, I mean, here I mean like literary text, let's say, or words basically on a page, and what that does to students when they are not able to comprehend something. What a PPT can do is, and where you use the word deanimate life, I think is really to animate it. And I have recently used this in my teaching. We have been given a tablet by the university, so we can use the tablet as like a whiteboard. But what that has enabled me is to actually underline, highlight as I'm teaching, and it's amazing what it does to sort of destabilize that written word, right? And say, okay, here is how it's behaving. So if you could, quickly reflect a little bit on that visuality of the PPT, and the hierarchy, right? That so many times in academia, it is the abstraction that is given that, the value, whereas PPT is just like, simplifying things in some ways. And then last, Sayan and Monishita, again, for me, I think, I mean, this is a brilliant method to bring to students. But for me, what I also take from this is also a brilliant methodology for us to create more self-reflexive instructors, more to create self-reflexive writing, teachers as well. So, in the role of teacher as evaluator, I see this also as a pedagogical tool for writing instructors. So if you could also think through the possibilities of this. So anyway, I mean, these are the questions, and then there are already more questions waiting here. So let's move on to, whoever wants to respond, and then we can go on to the other questions.
I can quickly respond
Sure.
to your question. The first part of your question was, what did the online medium do to the nature of this course? Yeah. So we hadn't planned this course to be held online. But like you mentioned, one of the things that the online medium does is sort of reduce the power of the institution and creates an even playing ground for both the instructor and the students. That really worked in our benefit in this case, because we were trying to create a space for discussions, for casual conversations about the topics that were brought into class. So I think the chat tool on Zoom was heavily used, and that was really nice to see that there were students who were not turning on the videos, stating various reasons. The internet is poor where I am, or my camera is not working, etc. But they were using the chat tool to interact with the class, with the teacher. I think online worked out in our benefit. And the second part of your question was, why did students gravitate towards two specific questions? Number one was about the mother tongue. The second one was, what if feminists rule the world? I think this would go beyond the course itself. This is a program for women, and most of the students who join our program are being introduced to these themes for the first time. So it is, of course, something new and novel, but also something that they really connect with immediately. Someone like Urvashi Bhutalia comes and talks to them in term 1. So you can imagine the direction in which they're moving as they reach term 5 and 6. So that's when this course happens. So I think part of the way in which this program has been designed is to make these individuals more aware of their position in society, and language and their gender play a big role in that. And which is why I think many of them chose to pick the two questions on language and gender. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. And I mean, I think for all of us, it would be interesting to see how the choice of questions, assignments are they, to what extent are they being determined by the methodology of teaching that we are using? I mean, that would be an interesting direction to go in. But yeah, thanks a lot, Sandeep.
Thank you.
Yeah, to answer your question, Madhura, yeah, I think this is something that I have been pondering upon a lot, the question you raised, and I just left it as an observation because honestly, I don't have an answer to this per se, but this is just something I'm toying around with because I felt it. Okay, as in when I started observing these PPTs and started working with these PPTs, even when I was attending the boot camp as a student, essentially, right? So when I was at the receiving end of it, I started feeling more comfortable in terms of like, this was a space where it's almost like this blank space where everybody pitches in their ideas in order to make something out of it. This is one thing. The second thing, as you said, yes, of course, it's about the way we annotate a text, say, for instance, for when we are teaching reading, and whether it's highlighting, whether it is, by use of making texts in bold and all of that. This is something that the PPT obviously is giving us a space for, just like it does in a worksheet also. But especially, I felt that this works probably a little better in a larger class. like when it is a smaller class, it's much easier to pay individual attention to the students. But when because I was working with, like, one class had like 50 students, 48 students, one had 80 students. So especially in terms of teaching writing, you can understand how challenging that was, because there's no scope of giving that much of feedback, and inviting participation was also very, very difficult. So this kind of a visual arrangement, I think, drew the students into the class better. It's sort of, that's why I feel that it's more like a safe space. It's a space where the elements are arranged in a way. It's neat, but it's, in a sense, it's flexible. There's the visible flexibility. Visual flexibility is the word
Right,
I'm using,
right.
because of that you can move things around. Okay, this place,
Yes.
I want to add something, so I'm moving, I'm increasing the size of the box, I'm doing all of these things. So I think that sort of creates some kind of a connect with the student in a situation where there is no physical connection possible, in the absence of the offline space, where you have a certain kind of a different kind of a connection emerges there, right? So
Yeah.
in that sense, I think this acted as a very good mediator between the student and the teacher, especially between these black boxes of Zoom.
Yeah.
It sort of opened up this one space where all the people could come in and work together in that sense.
Right, right, absolutely. And I guess I think you already pointed out in your presentation that it would be useful to go, like, when we go back to the physical
Yeah,
classroom, to now see what happens to the PPT,
exactly.
right, in the
Exactly.
classroom. Great.
Exactly.
Thanks a lot, Pritha. Yeah.
So, Madhura, yeah, so maybe I could share some of the things that's coming to my mind in response to your question, and then Shayan could add his own. Frankly speaking, this is the first time that I became part of a role play in the class. Before this, I have used role play in my ESL classrooms, where I was using it as an information gap technique to create simulated spaces for authentic communication to develop oral proficiency of my students who were, so those were proficiency development modules where I used role play and simulation. But using that tool to talk about the meta language and the meta concept around reading and writing was a refreshing experiment for me. And taking that idea forward, I did encourage my students to stage a debate in the class. They um, picked up the format, and I think Shayan also did a similar media debate where people took up different roles and different characters, and we discussed argumentation through that, because debating is a very interesting format to talk about arguments, evidence, but it's in the oral medium, which
Yeah.
makes it a little accessible to everybody
Yes.
before you actually get into the writing. So that has also been my interest, how we can, in writing programs, how can we give equitable share of space to visual and oral techniques and medium, because a lot of time we tend to create a hierarchy between reading, writing, and speaking, listening. And
Yes.
I really want to see how listening and speaking, reading and writing can all be integrated and seen together as part of authentic and holistic communication. So those have been some of the things. Moving forward, I was thinking it would be interesting to use some of these as part of our faculty development programs, like you said,
Absolutely.
self-hypnosis, reflex. So
Absolutely.
we can, because that can actually allow us to have more honest conversations within the teams, because each one of us bring our own, I don't know, philosophy to teaching reading and writing. Some are more into content, some are more into professional writing framework, some are more into a socio-cultural framework. So these are different takes, and although in team meetings and all, they come out in very subtle ways, we can actually make it more explicit and have more honest conversations and see where are the limitations and challenges moving forward, and how can we together come up with a collective understanding of what we are doing in our classroom. So that would be
Yeah.
my further exploration with the technique. And Shayan has been using role plays for many years at YF, so he will have some more interesting things to share.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of performative sort of tools generally, role play music and so on. But I mean, adding to what Monishita is saying, I mean, I completely agree with Madhura, your point too, that these can be used as tools to create more self-reflexive instructors, because there are insights we get about our behavior, how we are using language, how we are moving in a space, how we are interrupting, mansplaining. I mean, those are insights we get when we sort of dramatize it and then sort of discuss it, right? And I think, so that it's definitely very useful. For me personally, since I sort of I position myself within the critical literacy tradition where language teaching is linked with a larger sort of discussion of, social justice and political justice, and how do we in fact use language and write language, create sort of arrangements of social justice. So given that, I feel that role playing is very powerful, because then we sort of pick up a variety of situations where there is disparity, inequality, conflict. And by dramatizing them, we are able to then unpack them. And also, in some sense, recover a sense of agency on how to intervene, right? Because the role play then opens up the question, what can we do differently? So yeah, that's my response.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you so much. I mean, I think just to add to what Monishita said, that as instructors, we also not just bring different approaches, but we bring very specific class and caste based cultural capital, right, to the classroom as well. And so I think that that is very valuable. But anyhow, there are other questions waiting here. So Ananya, how should I read it out, or would one of you read that out? How should we go about it?
Any way that you like. I think there are basically questions from Vasudha and Pritha.
Yes. So let me,
From Vasudha and Samir, I think for Pritha, I think, why don't you quickly
there is, I think, there is a question for Pritha that Vasudha has, saying, how did students react to the PPT as a tool? And could you tell us a little bit more about what they said in class or in feedback? And I'll also take Samir's question so that Pritha, you can answer both together. Samir is saying that you mentioned how the white space could be used to add and manipulate text. In my experience, this could be a little distracting as it required me to minimize, edit, go back to presentation mode each time. So spend more time in slide mode with not everyone able to see what was being typed, right? So did you face any problem like that? And if so, how did you deal with it?
So to answer Vasudha's question, the thing is, I do not have any structured, proper feedback from the Kriya workshop about the Kriya class for use of the PPT. The only thing that came up was actually something I made as a handout, also because in Kriya we were using more of worksheets than PPT. We were using more of the shared Google Doc, because I just had 15 students in class, and like we have made these workspaces for everyone in a shared Google Doc, and whatever they had to do, they were doing it along the way, which I could monitor. So that way it was not that much of a feedback that came from there. However, there was something that I made with the PPT, a handout of sorts, where I used one of the templates of a comic book in PowerPoint, Microsoft PowerPoint, to create a presentation, not really a presentation, a comic book on how to write conclusions. And Vasudha, Samir, and the CWP folks have seen it already. So because of lack of time, I didn't share. Also because it's something we can also do offline, and that is something people really appreciated, and almost everyone mentioned it in their feedback. However, in Symbiosis, I had some verbal discussions in the last class. I was asking them what worked, what did not work, sort of a thing. And because it was a much larger class there, most people felt that the PPT was much more helpful than say, like when I was using these sticky note thing that Google, I can't remember the name of the software right now. The extension Jamboard. So because it was a much bigger class, they felt that the Jamboard thing did not work much, but they felt that the PPT really worked well. So in fact, one of the observations that I put out about use of the white space, some of the students pointed out in Symbiosis that unlike some of my PPTs which had template backgrounds, when I used a white space, they felt much calmer. Like, they felt that it was much more approachable and friendlier than something which I realized was a mistake, which is why I mentioned that in the observations today also. Coming to your question, Samir, yes, that can be a problem. I understand. But generally, if I am putting a paragraph or so, and I tend to not move to a slideshow mode at all. I only show it like, within the space which can be edited. So I don't keep switching back and forth. I also share the PPT before the class, the incomplete PPT, and later after it's filled in with all the content, I turn it into a PDF and send it to them. So they have both the versions, and they can also read it, like, they can have it open on their system. I ask them to have it open on their system. So that way, that challenge can be worked around. I did not face much issues with it, with the students at least. I did not feel much of that problem.
Can I ask a brief follow-up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure, Vasudha.
Yeah, so that, I mean, it almost seems counterintuitive that a teaching tool which a faculty member prepares and which students can't manipulate as such, and that it almost seems counterintuitive to me that it should become a space, it should be seen as a private screen, it should give rise to intimacy, and therefore should become a space of participation. So I'm just wondering how that actually works. So if it's circulated later as a PDF, which is also something students can't change, just how exactly
So
that sense came about for your students.
understand. So, Vasudha, what I feel is that the entire thing about sharing it as a PDF is
Mm,
after whatever materials, whatever things that the students have said in class, which has
okay.
been copied from, say, chat boxes or whatever their views are, they have been put in. So, what is being shared is actually a collaborative work. It's no longer like the voice of the teach instructor
Okay.
only. And intimacy of the screen, I feel, was it's in a different sense. What I mean to say is that when we are looking at like a screen, a PDF shown on a presentation in a classroom, in a big classroom or a hall or lecture hall, it feels like a very distant thing, right? It's very easy to switch off, whereas when we are looking at it in a like very close, it's exactly what I mentioned in the last class, to think about that, how we binge watch shows for hours on Netflix, and then when we are in a cinema hall, a movie theater, or some screening in classes going on, we tend to get distracted. Like how, especially my students, I see that all the time. Like I'm screening, so because I teach films, and screening something, they'll get distracted, but they'll binge watch Netflix stuff like for 5 hours. So that's what made me think about the intimacy of the screen.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, there's one more question, but we are already over time. So, Ananya, do we have one more time for one more question, or
Oh,
should we
sure.
end?
This is the last session. So just take
Yes.
one more question and
Yes.
then.
So there was again a question for Sayan and Monishita from Vasudha, and Vasudha says it's interesting that students should talk about the importance of empathy in giving feedback. Do you see any change in how empathy develops in person versus when students interact over screens, or when you interact with them over screens and in the context of the pandemic?
I think it's a very, very thought-provoking question, and maybe both of us could uh, very briefly respond to it. Personally, if you ask me, I did see that because we were online, because the fellows were very anxious when they started their fellowship, because the Young India fellows are there for just 11 to 12 months. They don't have a 3 to 4 year course to let the pandemic settle and get back on campus. So they was very anxious about doing the fellowship online, and because of the pandemic, we all know it was affecting each one of us directly, indirectly, with lots of challenges. I saw that some of these conversations around empathy, because there was another session that I conducted on empathetic listening as a tool in critical reading and writing. And all these sessions stood out in student feedback. Moving forward, I felt that because it was the pandemic, we all realized that the only way to sail through this is to hold on to each other, to be more sensitive to each other, understand each other's contexts better. So to that extent, I think it worked in my favor. I was able to see a lot more connectedness amongst the fellows, and making these conversations overt and direct. I think it only facilitated that process of creating an empathetic community. Maybe if we were face to face, it would not have been so palpable and so observable. Not measurable, but definitely observable. I did see that they were really reaching out for each other. And, I was also working through small groups outside class. I did a lot of asynchronous teaching also. I put a lot of things outside the class, which could be just done in a different way. So I did see that sense of community, that empathy, which I was really obsessing about in the beginning, it did happen after all. So it also questioned my own beliefs about online mode, because before the pandemic, being in academia, I always saw distance education and online mode of education a little, in the lower in the hierarchy. These are our own biases. So I was able to question all that and see that, no, I mean, it is possible to have a better engagement actually. In fact, we saw that in the team of 7 writing instructors, all of us felt that the quality of student work and engagement was all-time high in the last 5 years in the online mode. That for me was a really quite counterintuitive and heartwarming to see that these strategies actually worked.
Yeah, and to add to Monishita, I mean, I would want to start by saying that while it was definitely a very affirming experience to find that the online mode was so charged with empathy and connection, I think that, I mean, we were also teaching in a privileged institution, and we had certain tools and certain resources that, most other teachers didn't. So I think, so in that sense, like right from the beginning, I knew that it wouldn't go terribly bad. These are small groups we are working with. Most of them would have adequate internet connection to at least support video. And so we would be able to have a lot of content, recreate the physical classroom experience in some sense. Also, we were on Zoom, so we could do breakout rooms. But at the same time, I thought that for me, I have 2 sort of responses. One is about the similarities between the offline and online mode. So in terms, I think a lot depends on how you are introducing the discussion on feedback and empathy. And it's something that has to be reinforced throughout. And like with Monishita, I started with the class on listening too. And we talked about the politics of listening. And so this was a discussion that was happening throughout the semester. But also at moments when we were doing peer feedback sessions, after the session, I would also follow up with students to find out what happened. And it wasn't working out for everybody, in that there were people who'd have felt they couldn't speak. It's not that they were blaming somebody else for it. Sometimes it was just not being used to this, not being used to sort of talk in English, so fluently. So there were many different factors playing out throughout the semester, and the idea was to just address them and create a space where through these exercises, like the role-playing exercise, we could intermittently discuss the politics of feedback. So that was a similarity for me between the offline and online mode. But in terms of the challenges of the online mode, one was that, of course, not everyone would turn on their videos. And when we are talking about developing the sensitivity towards body language, the energy of a person, right? How the person is listening, you can't gauge all of that when the video is off. So I would find this disparity sometimes as I would go from group to group, and see that in some groups it's very active, everyone is talking, and another group everyone's quiet, all the videos are off. And I couldn't really gauge what was going on. And people would say, oh, we have completed the discussion. But sometimes those would not be satisfying discussions. So yeah, so those challenges continue to be there.
We will have to wrap up because the other session is starting at 5:15.
Yes.
So we will have to wrap, but this was absolute, I mean, such a fitting end to our very first conference, which also feels like a very first conference for several other people who have not had a chance to do this exactly, right? This kind of work, what the previous panel, what we did in the previous panel, but also today, I think. And that gives me a sense of immense satisfaction. This gives me a sense of immense potential that, as I was saying earlier in an email, that, the idea behind these snapshot presentations is so that we know who to press on and call for a longer workshop, who to press on and say, okay, now we can develop this work with them. These are our resource people. And I think through the conference, we've met many such new colleagues. We've been introduced to their work. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the year where we can reach out to you all individually to come and work with us, do presentations, whatever else. So the only thing left to say now is I can't believe it's over. Thank you so much. I mean, Vasudha, Grishma, and Samir and I, we were just like up to our ears with emails the last few days. And I think the joke was that, I've been emailing like a Nigerian prince who has a lot of money to give away. I think I'm almost going to miss not emailing all of you 50 times a day. It was really, really exciting. I'm leaving energized, and I hope that is the case for everyone else also. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. Thank you, Madhura. Thank you all our panelists and our audience. And with that, I'll call this to a close.
Thank you, Ananya. Thank
for
you,
having us.
Vasudha, Samir, Grishma, Pritha for organizing this, and thank you all the participants. And I will end by saying that CWP owes us a samosa and chai at some point when the pandemic is over.
Yes, absolutely. At some point, promise.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.